And welcome to the Nazarene Stream Preacher. Today we're going to be talking about 10 questions for revolutionaries. So you think you want revolution. Well, how much have you actually thought this through? And we're going to be doing this to the background of Elder Scrolls V Skyrim. And interestingly, a dragon has appeared that I'm going to attempt to hunt down and slay. Oh, nope, it looks like it escaped. So guess we won't. Which is very related to the concept of revolutions and revolutionary. Trying to track down people who want to really bring about revolution and then look deep within their minds at what really are the sources of those, what are the motivations behind all of this, and where do they really think things are going in the long run. These are things which are quite extraordinarily difficult to do, and a lot of times people really don't understand their true motivations. There is something that looms deep within the human mind, which, when unchecked and outside of biblical orthodoxy, it is going to ultimately go towards Gehenna. It is going to go towards a place of chaos and destruction. So anyways, without any further hesitation, more of today's gameplay will be a philosophical and theological conversation than just pure playing of a game. But that is because I want us to have a serious conversation about revolution and the tactics and the mentalities and the popular slogans and things that are going on in our world. I saw a quote the other day from Thomas Sowell who said, you know, it's amazing in our modern day and age, there are people who can do just about everything. They can vent their emotions, they can make profound statements, they can question other people's motives, they can proclaim platitudes and how they want to change the world, but they can't actually make an argument. And we find this to be such a serious problem, and one that even comes to infect the church, though I'm not here just to beat up on the church, but we as Christians, we have to do better. We have to do a good job of making arguments, making biblically sound arguments, because there is an infection that is coming for destruction. And just to note how important this is, you know, about a year or so ago, we did a program, or maybe it was earlier this year, who knows in the age of Corona how time works, but we did a program where there was a woman who called the police because her parents shut off her phone. Well, she was not like a child. She was like 30s or in her 40s, and she was a real estate agent. You know, this last week we saw there were some co-founders of Black Lives Matter who were doing occult stuff there in California, and they were professors at like Cal State and UCLA, and they were basically doing a form of necromancy, if you want to know the truth. This stuff is happening out in broad daylight, and it is seizing our culture, and it is afflicting our culture in a very serious way. And we have to realize we've got to start making arguments, and we've got to start fighting for stuff. So we're going to be looking at an article today from Zero Hedge, and Zero Hedge, if anyone wants a link to this article, I'll share it in the comments or something. Hit me up if you want a link to it. It's called, So You Want to Overthrow the State, 10 Questions for Aspiring Revolutionaries. And these really are great questions, and I wanted us to walk through them ourselves. So we are going to do just that. We're going to walk through these. We're going to have some worldview discussion, some biblical orthodoxy and things of that nature. And maybe the dragon is back. So without any more, the first question is, do I have the facts straight? So this is question number 1 of 10 on questions for aspiring revolutionaries. And now this really is a very, very important question. Do I have the facts straight? They open this up by quoting Karl Marx in saying, you know, philosophers have hitherto only interpreted the world in various ways, but the point is to change it. Sort of this mentality that we're here to truly change the world. Not to just, you know, philosophize or have ideals or anything, but we actually are here to enact change. And this has been something which has been fairly consistent across the Marxist revolutions. They always seriously want to enact change, but to the point of this question, do you actually have the facts straight? You know, a lot of people in our world do not have the facts straight, and you find this with just about every incident that goes on in society. We've really been trained to appreciate emotion more than the actual facts of situations. And while emotions are things that we have to contend with, we have to realize that if you don't actually get the facts straight, you're never going to make a positive change on the world. That simply is just how it is. you're setting yourself up for failure, for chaos, in such a serious way if you do not get the facts straight. You see this with a lot of crime and, oops, wrong poison, or potion. You see this with a lot of crime and related stuff. For instance, people will say, you know, there's evidence of systemic racism. They look at disparities, and they really say anything that has a disparity is evidence of racism. When you can look at things like self-reported crime data, which means somebody who's been a victim of a crime, they pick up their phone, they call the police with the specific details of a crime, and you look at the disparities across racial groups, and you compare that to actual arrests and convictions, and the numbers are actually extraordinarily similar anytime these studies have been done. So that tells you can't just blame it on the quote-unquote system, that there's just racist cops coming to arrest people, if the self-reporting crime data is reflecting a similar disparity between people groups, and it's all within the margin of error. So that would tell you that that's not necessarily what is responsible for this. And, you know, this really just does apply across so many things. We see the current incidents where a man is being canonized as a saint who had been accused of, you know, raping, you know, using his fingers to sexually assault a woman and then resist arrest, and now people are acting as if he is a hero. It's an absence of principles where facts do not matter, and that's because in this worldview, you're here for the revolution. You're not here for facts or anything of that nature. You're just here to bring revolution at any cost. And that's a very dangerous thing. All right, so question number 2. And I'll see if I can actually do this a little quicker. All right, so number 2. What makes me so sure I won't replace the existing regime with something far worse? And now this is something which is quite fascinating, because across history, there have been a lot of people who have asserted themselves to be interested in change. You can look at what was going on in Russia, and Russia's history is quite fascinating. We talk a lot about Nazi Germany, but a lot of people are unfamiliar with what went on in Russia, and the long haul towards chaos that ultimately really climaxed under the Soviet Union. But even before that, there was a lot of just terrible living conditions for the Russian people. There was a lot of issues between the classes of people, just really bad stuff going on. But when Vladimir Lenin comes onto the table, you know, his brother had been killed for being part of a plot to kill the Tsar and some royals. And when Lenin when Lenin gets the ability to enact his own changes, he doesn't actually do anything that will benefit people. He basically just wants to be the tyrant in charge. And so often across history, we have seen this being the case. And regardless of what people they thought their intentions were, their motivations and their beliefs ultimately won out in the end, because for Lenin, he was motivated by revenge for his brother. And guess what? The violent takeover of Russia, where they killed the czars, they killed the royal families, they overtook the Russian society. It was bloody, and it was basically just a big exercise in revenge and settling scores. And biblically, this is not what God wants us to do. God tells us to love our enemies, love our neighbors. God knows that when you do these sort of things, you only get more and more chaos. You have to love people and put in the great work of changing hearts and minds so that people, they have that internal conviction to move towards God, and you're not just having violent revolution after violent revolution. Because historically, without something aspirational, when it is just, I want revenge, you get such chaos. So number 3 on this list of questions, is my revolution program just a bunch of platitudes with which no decent person would disagree? And this is the most clever question that's in this list, and it's the most clever question by far, because it addresses one of the problems that we have in our society. A lot of the tactics of the deceiver are to brand things in such a way that they're a Trojan horse that people won't say no to. This is one of Satan's chief tactics. This is one of his most beloved tools. If you name something in such a way that people decent people will not be opposed to it. You can get them to do whatever you want. You can lead them around like a bull with a ring in his nose. And this has been something which has happened with Black Lives Matter. If you oppose the agenda of Black Lives Matter, it sounds like you don't like black people. That was a deliberately manipulative name given to something so that they would not be held accountable. And there's enough truth that there are real issues to address in the world that they basically have conceived of something which can never be held accountable. They can just take over society, and it sounds virtuous, even if they're shooting police officers in the head and then blocking the emergency room and say, we want the cops to die. That's just a fact. And this is a tactic that is of the deceiver, because regardless if you apply it to something like that, or even an action like putting on a mask or something like that in the age of coronavirus, when you say, oh, well, if it helps a little bit, shouldn't you just do it? Well, where do you draw the line on that? There's a chance that, I could get a call from a celebrity to go out on a date. So do I just hold out for that? I mean, no. You actually have to be reasonable and look at evidence, but we're told in this modern day and age, if you do not agree with whatever the platitudes are of the day, then you're evil and you're mean and hateful. And this is a tactic that the deceiver always uses, and it also shows you that there's really no substance in the arguments there. There's no, if you have to brand something in such a way that people can't disagree with it based on its name, then you don't really have any substance behind it. It's kind of like setting a moat up outside of a castle. You put the moat there because you don't want people to come inside. They don't want people to look beneath the skin. They don't want people to hear any argument, so you just name it something that no decent person would disagree with. So the next thing I want us to talk about here is question number 4. It says, is my revolutionary manifesto any better than the Underpants Gnomes business plan from the 1998 episode of South Park? Now, I do not watch South Park. I'm not familiar with South Park hardly at all. But evidently in this episode, there's a 3-point business plan, and in the first phase of the business plan, the first point it says collect underpants, then phase 2 is a question mark, and phase 3 is a profit. This kind of reminds me of the prophet, and that's prophet with a PH, not prophet with a F, Jonah, who is like, my plan is to run away from God. Step 1, instead of going to Nineveh, run to Tarsus. Step 2, question mark. Step 3, succeed. Oops. It is not that simple to pull off a massive revolution or something like that. And as we said before, most of the time when people have tried to have a revolution, the American Revolution is one of the few examples in history where something aspirational happened. Most of the time in history, it's something that's just atrociously wicked that has happened. And that's just the case of it. And also, people don't realize that there's a lot more involved in the world than just simply trying to change things. You actually have to be able to fill in the gaps there. This kind of reminds me of what Jordan Peterson says, where there are people who want to run a global economy, but they can't organize their own bedroom. If you haven't got your personal life together, why do you think that you can pull off such a massive thing? And that moves on to question 5, which is, how is this actually going to work? And a lot of people don't understand how a lot of the things in the world work. They basically have an emotion that they want to be fulfilled, and sometimes there are real problems that they want to be fulfilled, but they don't have eyes for what the actual antidotes, the actual solutions are, nor do they have eyes that understand what real evil is. And that really leaves people in a place where they're unable and they're ill-equipped to do anything meaningful, where they're ill-equipped to do anything that will actually help the situation, so everything just festers and spins and just stays in chaos forever. The abolition of a rational economy is something which you might hear talked about though they wouldn't call it that, but just the abolition of something like capitalism. You see where people, they want to tear these things down, but they don't understand that the world is not naturally a place of peace and prosperity. One of the great deceptions that is promulgated in our modern day and age is that, the world is a place of peace and harmony, and then these systems come in, these capitalist pigs come in, and they keep everything in division. Go and read what goes on in communist China, communist Russia. Look at all this stuff. It's not peace and prosperity. And furthermore, there's just perpetual suspicion. Who's a spy? Who's going to turn me in? There's no peace. There's no harmony at all. But beyond that, the biblical wisdom tells us, unless you live in Eden, or you are a holdover from Eden. And by the way, if anyone listening to this was there in the Garden of Eden, that means you're probably the serpent, or you're possessed by the serpent, and you need to give me a call so we can do a little exorcism. But this idea that you can just take away the systems and everything is going to go to harmony, that is not true. We live in fallen creation. God did not design it to be fallen, but it is in fact fallen. And utopia is not something which naturally occurs. In fact, even within Christianity, our goal is not to create a utopia. And I hate to even compare the kingdom of heaven to a utopia, because so many times when people have tried to employ their utopian logic and their utopian visions, it has become a hellscape. And the kingdom of heaven is not going to be a hellscape, so I don't even like making that comparison. But the purpose of Christianity is not to create a utopia. It is to do the good work. And when you understand the truth of Christianity, yes, there will be a new earth, a new heaven, new earth. But before then, there are going to be people who turn their hearts away. I mean, you read through the New Testament, there are so many people who turn away from all that is good, true, and beautiful. And Christ tells us that is going to be the case. You have to persevere in fallen creation. And therefore, a lot of the wisdom and the tactics and we tool, there are restraints against fallen creation. And even when we look at the role of something like an American system of government, it is meant to be a restraint against corruption, a restraint against the wiles of fallen creation, which is why it's so important for people to believe in an almighty God. The idea of America wasn't a place without religion, but it was a place where individuals would use their faith to hold the government accountable rather than the government holding them accountable. That is one of the beautiful attributes of the American tradition. Now, that's largely been lost because we've been secularized and we've been trained to think and function like atheists and essentially be atheists. But we have to realize that the world is not naturally a peaceful, harmonic place. I mean, think about everything we have in the world. What can you think of that when left alone actually gets better? Something like wine, which increases its quality with age, is extremely unique. And it's unique for so many reasons. It takes a lot of work to do that. It doesn't just happen on its own. But most things, if you leave a car alone, it will rot. It'll dry rot. It'll rust. It will decay. If you leave a house alone, it will decay. If you leave something alone, it'll get covered in dust. If you leave batteries in an electronic, it'll explode. Just about everything that you can think of, and in fact, really everything we can think of, gets worse over time if it's left unattended to. And the few things that don't get worse over time require an extraordinary amount of attention to keep them from doing that. And this idea that just the world is going to be a blessed place if you tear down the systems, that's not how the world works. So number 6, continuing on these questions, does my argument for how it will work rely on people discarding self-interest, becoming a lot less horrible, and or becoming a lot smarter? So this is the idea that, sanctification. A miracle occurs. We tear down the system and a miracle occurs and everybody's changed. People are not sanctified by anything other than the Holy Spirit. Plain and simple. People are not sanctified by the system of government they live under. People are not sanctified by their own designs, their own ambition. And that's just true. If your worldview for utopia and revolution requires a fundamental change in how people exist, yeah, it's probably you're probably going to bring hell to people more than you're going to bring people something aspirational. Because again, that's the whole thing. A lot of our systems that we have, they are meant to be restraints against fallen creation. They're meant to be restraints against things that are destructive. So number 7, how has it worked the other times it has been tried? And this is kind of, look at other examples of socialism and communism throughout the history. Have they worked well? And you can see the answer to that is no. We don't want to go out yet. Another question we have here, and I'm not going to do this quest. I'm going to do a similar close by quest. Looking at the next question, number 8, it says, are people moving toward or away from the kind of society I want to establish? So, again, are people building boats to escape from capitalism into somewhere like Cuba, or are they building boats to escape from it? Are the Trabant, the cardboard car there that plagued Eastern Germany and really a lot of Europe during the era of communism there after the fall of Germany in World War II and the time period before the fall of the Soviet Union. You look at the comm block countries, where people desperately, did they have to build a wall because so many people were wanting to flee places like the United Kingdom, West Germany to get to communism, or was they building a wall to keep people in there? There's a reason for that. And it's not just that they had the wrong people in charge. It's that they had the wrong ideas in charge. They weren't worshiping the one true God. They were worshiping something else. Number 9. What will I do with the people who aren't willing to go along with my revolution? And history tells us you have to crush them. You have to put them in gulags and concentration camps. You have to commit extraordinary evils that are, historically speaking, worse than the evils that you thought that you were opposing. It's sort of like right now we look at the Black Lives Matter movement and their protest, which are asserted by the media to be mostly peaceful. They have killed far more people in these protests than there have been unarmed blacks killed by the police last year. When you look at the number of children that have been killed in relation to these incidents, it's unbelievable that this gets away without any accountability. So yeah, your emotional release may be sinful and far worse than what you thought you were opposing. Number 10, am I letting myself off the hook for questions 1 through 9 and giving myself too much credit for being passionate and sincere? And I like this question too because it hints to the fact that a lot of these people, they are sincere. But just because you're sincere doesn't mean that what you're doing is right. Quit trying to kick save. It doesn't mean that at all. So that's where we're going to end our conversation today. A little bit of a short conversation going through these 10 questions, but we have to realize what we are up against is real. There are things trying to destroy our world. They are coming. They're not pockets to laugh at and say they're not dominant. Even if there's only a small group of people who adhere to them, they take over our society extremely fast. I mean, look at what has happened with the NFL this year. And God doesn't want us to live this way. Do we want to live in a society where you can't love your neighbors? Even people you disagree with, that you can't love them? Well, we have to realize that the virtue of that we have aspired towards in America, and there were times when we were closer to it and times when we were further away from it, is not just that there's this blanket tolerance. There's no virtue in tolerance. If you're tolerating evil, then you're allowing evil to fester and grow. That's not a good thing. And if you're tolerating someone who's different from you, but evil's not necessarily growing, then okay. Then that's all right. Tolerance itself has no inherent value. There's no inherent value in just listening to different ideas. If you listen to 50 different ideas on how to, eat paper, that's not very useful. But one of the things that is useful when you get to, different opinions on something that's meaningful. So I bring all this up to say that a lot of the things that we have viewed as being virtuous in America actually aren't the real virtues. The real virtues are things that are good, that are holy, that are true, that actually take people towards a place of prosperity. And we have to have some premises that we join together with in the common good. There has to be some assimilation to some basic truths and some basic common goods. And we've moved largely away from that, and that's where we get this desire for revolution. People, they don't have any appreciation for how unique America is in the course of human history as far as blessing people and giving people opportunity. And so we've got to start pushing back on this. May God be with us as we look to preach the gospel, and may God put a conviction in people's hearts and minds that they can draw near to Him. So, thank you for joining me. Again, this is Pastor J. Dylan Proctor from the Nazarene Stream Preacher. If anyone has any thoughts, questions, or comments, please reach out to me. And you can do that by going to, you can email me at jeffdyllanproctor@gmail.com, or you can look me up on Parler at J. Dylan Proctor. So, on that